Hey, thank you guys. All right, Renee, thanks for being here, man. We're so excited to have you. Now, listen, I got to meet you through Leo, and I'm a bit of a hermit, and
Hmm.
so I didn't realize at first who you were in terms of like how much impact you've had in not just the real estate industry, but a lot of different industries as well. Until I started telling, my wife and then a few other folks that I knew that I had met you, and they were like, "Oh my God, he's transformed my life." And
Hmm.
so I'm really excited to be having you here and also be working with you on Amplify EXP as well. For those of you who may not know Renee, would you mind giving maybe a brief introduction?
Sure. And I've said this to you 100 times. The feeling is mutual. I mean, you are an icon in this industry, and you've created some of the things that I've used and followed and learned from. So the relationship's always been a fun one, and especially here at XP with the vision that all of you have has been great. My name's Rene Rodriguez, and my background is in behavioral neuroscience. And if you want to learn more about me, I think you can follow me right here on Instagram and my website. You can learn all sorts of things. I did write a book on the neuroscience of influence and giving people a methodology to understand the gaps between our relationships and what happens in the brain when we don't fill the gaps. Example, like a moment like that where I pause in the middle of a talk, it sends our brain into a frenzy. And so these questions that I always ask are, why is it that we jump to conclusions so quickly? Why is it that an unanswered text can send us into a frenzy of insecurity? Why is it that a rumor can spread faster than an official communication from a company? And it all happens in the foundations of the brain. And when we learn to answer those questions, you can start realizing the amount of missing information there are between people in the sales process and everything. And when we realize what the brain does in those moments, which is fill those gaps to construct their understanding of the world, in essence, constructing the reality, we start realizing the importance of being good communicators so that people don't fill in the gaps, that people don't make the negative and miss assumptions around who we are. And so I've been teaching leaders how to do that for a long time. I've also done sales training at all levels. And because I think when you look at the psychology and the neuroscience of decision making, of resistance to new ideas, of presentation skills, sales process, all of it goes back to the same exact science. And that's one of the things I'm most excited about sharing with you all.
Yeah, it's funny because I've often said, listen, EXP University builds amazing training, right? We go out, we study the businesses of top agents of whatever given topic, and then we go model what they collectively are doing, right?
Right.
But what I've always said is, as an agent, there's nothing that I'm going to teach you that if you went and made 200 phone calls or knocked 200 doors, you wouldn't catch on to really quickly yourself, right?
Yeah.
So then the question is, well, why don't people do that? And I think the hardest step is not anything other than the 6 inches between your ears, getting that into motion. Your experience, you've had a lot of it. What is it that holds us back, and how do we get past that?
Well, over 50 years ago, this group called the Behavioral Press Research, Behavioral, Behavioral Scientific Behavioral Press Institute, I believe it's called BHRP. Yeah, Behavioral Press. And they were asked, as a group of psychologists, asked to study this whole phenomenon as to why, how do they improve and use psychology to help the sales process. And so they started looking at presentation skills and closing and communications, all the things that we think are really comes to sales. But when they looked at it, they said, well, there's really 4 phases. And one of the first phases is the approach. How do you approach? How do you inform? How do you present? And then how do you create closure to that? And they said, well, if they don't make the approach, none of the other skills matter because then I have nobody to present to. So they
Yeah,
decided to put 100% of their energy in this concept called sales call reluctance.
yeah,
And what they discovered was fascinating. One, these are a bunch of really boring psychologists that discovered there are 16 types of reasons of why we are afraid to make a sales call. But it comes to understanding what we call the big M, which would be your motivation in life. And now there's motivations that, the raw motivation, I'm not referring to that. You have
yeah,
this emotional and mental and physical energy moving towards your big G. So you have your M and your G. And if I move all my motivational energy towards my goal, and the goal in this sense is to prospect, and there's a perfect tube, right, of this energy going to this, the outcome of that should be earning what you're worth. So we're moving from this motivational energy to our goal. The outcome of that would be to earning what we're worth. Now, if you're not earning what you're worth, meaning you're not making the money you make, they look at it as a very simple equation that first we have to check, is the motivational energy there? And then we say, okay, so let's say somebody's going through a financial crisis at home. Well, it takes emotional, mental, and physical energy to deal with that. Or maybe there's a divorce at home. Maybe somebody got cancer. Maybe a kid is sick. Maybe they're remodeling their home and their whole home is in upheaval. That takes some of the fuel to move towards goals, because you have this what we call goal diffusion, or this motivational energy is dispersed in other ways. And so you don't get as much there. So that's the first step, is the motivation there. Now, a lot of times when I see people with low motivation, I ask, who are they married to? And I had one situation, this gentleman just didn't have any motivation. Well, who's his wife? The number one salesperson. Well, she's making $1 million a year. So he's just there. He doesn't, not real need to do it. Right. And there's not much motivation to do that. And so what they found is that if you lack the motivation, then you can't really be reluctant, because how can you be reluctant to do something you don't want to do in the first place? So we solved that problem first. And then secondly, now, if we go to the goal, if you have too many goals and these arrows coming out, then all that motivational energy is dispersed and diluted, and you're not really doing anything. They call it goal diffusion. And so here I'm motivated, but I'm doing 20 different things. Well, then those 20 different things aren't getting the energy they deserve. And so, but what they found were, in between the motivation and goals, there's leaks. And, the example I give, if we were to be in a race and we were to have a glass of water the same size, and I give you a straw and me a straw, but then I take your straw and I go like this, and I pound it on the table, and I create that little line. We've all been there. We try to open it up and it creates that slit, and we're trying to consume the water, but we're also consuming air, and you're only consuming about 30% of the water, because the rest of it's just air. Now you putting the same amount of effort in, getting a yield that's much higher. You're trying and trying and trying and getting very little. I'm trying and very normal and getting 3-4 times the amount that you are. Now, what's frustrating is a lot of times you watch people that are working really hard, not achieving many results. And while somebody else seems like they're on autopilot, just generating all this stuff. Well, what's happening is they have less leaks in the straw. And so some of those leaks are things like telephobia. They think the phone weighs 300 pounds, or they think the phone looks like a gun. They're going to put that phone to my head. Why would I shoot myself in the head? But there's a lot of fear around that phone selling. There's what we call emotionally unemancipated, which means they have a fear of presenting to people or selling to people that are of more power, influence, or education than they do. Some people have referral aversion, right? Where they go, I don't want to ruin an existing relationship by asking for more business. Some people have what we call friend shield, where they put a shield around their friends. They don't sell their friends. Well, if I have friend shield, but I have no yielder, which would be, I don't want to be perceived as pushy or modest, I might approach you and I could build a great relationship and I close you, but then we become friends. Now I won't ever sell you again because I put a shield around you. So there's 16 different types, but those are the real scientific reasons behind those.
That's amazing. And there's so much there to unpack. I want to go back to the motivation thing. James Clear in Atomic Habits, he talked about the habit formation cycle, right? Craving, response, reward, right? That's how habits are formed. And what I've found is habits in real estate, the reward doesn't come for 100 days at least. Meaning, if I've met a ready, willing, and able seller or buyer today, probably not going to close for 100 days, unless it's a cash buyer. But for the most part, that's rare, right? And so when we are trying to form the habit of prospecting, lead generating, whatever, and that reward's not coming today when I'm doing those calls, there's a huge disconnect there. And that's one of the challenges. You talked about motivation. You ask most real estate agents, why are you doing this? And they'll if you press hard enough, they'll give you a great answer. Loved ones, kiddos, all those great touchy-feely kind of emotional things. And yet connecting that to the daily habits of success as a motivation. Any advice that in terms of how you do that? How do you take this ethereal motivation and then channel that into a daily activity, especially one that, a lot of people are a little, you use the word reluctant to do. I'd say reluctant is being kind.
I think, it makes so much logical sense to be able to do that. I mean, can't you just realize that this is for your kids?
Yeah.
Well, it's very akin to this motivational piece around change or die. What if that was the motivation that you had? What if you literally, if you don't change, you will die? Let's just raise the motivation level. And what they found was that wasn't effective either. And so there's a study that was done in a book called Change or Die. And IBM every year has what they call the Global Innovator Outlook Conference. And in that conference, they bring in the biggest leaders from across the world. And this particular year, the topic was healthcare. And at the time, it was $1.8 trillion issue, which made up about, I think, 20% or 13% of the 19% of the GDP. And that almost $2 trillion were a healthcare budget was consumed by 5 behavioral issues: smoking, drinking, eating, not enough exercise, and too much stress. So things that we knew very clearly. And so they said, well, maybe we need to up the motivation. Let's just say, if you don't change, you'll die. So they use an opportunity where somebody just had an angioplasty, which is, where they're the precursor to heart disease. There's buildup of plaque in the arteries, and they crack open the chest cavity, pull them over. Now, by the way, this is all reversible through diet and exercise. And the procedure only lessens the pain. And so they said, let's wait till right after their surgery, they're on the recovery bed, and let's hit them in that moment. John, if you don't change, you'll die. So the CEO of Johns Hopkins University sharing this study. And what they found is that of that, 9 out of 10 were back within 2 years for a second procedure. Wow. So that change or die didn't work. And what they found was, when things are that drastic, we have to go into denial around that. We are in denial of the morbidness of life. If we didn't, we wouldn't be able to survive. And we realize how easily we could just die. And so we go into this denial. And it felt so disconnected. That proximity of that consequence was so far removed, right? It's like somebody who smokes, they know they're not supposed to smoke, but they're going to smoke anyway. We know we're not supposed to eat, cheeseburgers and fries, but yet that fry is not going to kill us because the consequence is so far removed. But if you were to lace that next burger or that next cigarette with cyanide, you wouldn't smoke it because you would just shorten that cycle or that proximity of the consequence. Because it's much more real at that point, which, by the way, is some of the challenge of leadership. It's also some of the challenge of salespeople. It's easy to say, oh, I don't need to invest right now, but I regret that in 20 years. I don't need to buy now. I want to wait the market out. Well, you probably regret that in 5 years when the prices are way more expensive. So we can learn to bridge that and shorten that proximity of consequence. But the University of Omaha, this guy by the name of Dr. Dean Ornish, saw this study and said there's a better way. And there's a spiritual, psychological, emotional, all these other components that go involved. And they took the same patients, the same kind of procedure. And instead of saying you're going to change or die, they walked in, the daughter would walk in with her grandchildren and saying, Dad, you really scared us. Dad would respond saying, honey, I love you. I'm strong. I'm going to be just fine. Well, Dad, you remember when I got married? Of course, honey, it was one of the greatest days of my life. Well, I remember how nervous I was, Dad. And I remember wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing. And then I looked over and I saw you and you winked at me and you smiled. And in that moment, I knew everything was okay. Wow, honey, gosh, you're going to make me cry because you know that I love you. Well, Dad, I'm not sharing that to make you cry. I'm sharing that because if you don't change how you eat and exercise, you're not going to see your grandchildren get married. And that study produced that 70% were not back after 3 years because it was much deeper connection around the fear of loss of something valuable. And that was the key. And so I think when it comes to motivation, it comes to us being able to change our behaviors, we do have to self-reflect and we have to look about what will I lose? What valuable things will I lose if I don't do this? And unfortunately, too many of us wait for that to be face in front of us. The divorce about to happen on our deathbed. The conversations that could have been avoided because we've been procrastinating those difficult looks inside before it's too late to realize the changes we need to make. So there's a lot of different approaches to this one, but we have to be able to figure out what is it that's important to us and what was the fear of that loss? What would that look like?
Yeah. Yeah. You talked about too, the I forget what you called it, but the friend bubble, I don't want to annoy the people, the friend shield. And I can tell you, man, I've done trainings where we do live calling in the training, right? Always follow the do not call TCPA rules, please. It's not paranoia if they're out to get you, and they really are out to get you. But I've had it happen multiple times where people literally start breaking down crying. And I go talk to them, what's wrong? Well, I can't do this. I can't call my friends. I'm just going to annoy them. They're going to think I'm sleazy and blah, blah, blah. How do you overcome that? How do you get people to reframe their thinking around that friend shield?
Well, what you're talking about is actually role rejection. And that's another type of sale called reluctance, where we have a shame about being associated to the self-promotional world. And so role rejection is one of the most difficult ones. The most expensive is yield, or somebody who's want to be seen as pushy or modest. But role rejection is a tough one because we don't see ourselves. So we change our titles. I'm not a salesperson. I'm a real estate professional. I'm a real estate consultant, right? And we're not in sales. And so they disassociate themselves to all the behaviors that do that. And if a salesperson had certain requirements, a job description, and you don't want to associate to that salesperson role, then you won't associate to the requirements either. And so we have to shift that. And every good salesperson has a story of transformation, that moment where they realized that they were and they found pride in it. I'll give you an example. One of my good friends, Scott Hardy, who was one of the greatest salespeople I've ever met. And he was a financial advisor for 24 years. And he was coming home one day with his friends. He went over to dinner at his friend's house. And his father had just been diagnosed with this illness. It was going to be very, very difficult. Now, Scott sold long-term healthcare insurance. And they were trying to figure out at the table what they were going to do. And he goes, the moment that conversation came up, he goes, Scott said, my heart sunk to the floor because I knew exactly what was going to happen next. And sure enough, the family, the friend goes, wait, guys, mom, dad, Scott sells an insurance. It covers this. Like, we have a solution. Scott, tell him what you do. And of course, like a record scratching, the father looks at Scott and says, Scott, what do you got? And he had to tell him the most difficult truth, which was, I can't help you because the policy would have had to have been in place prior to diagnosis. He goes, that wasn't even the hard part. The hard part was what the father said next. And he looked at him and he said, so were you waiting for something like this to happen before you told me about it? And it was like a gut punch to the soul, saying, who am I to not believe in my product enough to tell the people that I care about most that I could have actually been there? I was so concerned with being seen as pushy or immodest and worried about who I was that I missed the opportunity to actually help somebody. And isn't that why I sell this anyways, to help people? Yeah. And it was in that moment that he made a decision, said, if I don't believe in my product enough to tell my closest ones and to sell them on this, then I'm in the wrong business. And so what that means to an agent is, an agent, we know that the American dream has always been home ownership. We know that the fastest vehicle to wealth is in real estate. It's not in a wage or a salary. And if you know that a homeowner has an average net worth of $393,000 compared to the net worth of a renter of being just $10,000, there's a 44-time increase in doing that. Then we have an obligation to share this with as many people as possible to help them get into the game of net worth. And so those reframing moments, so we realize why it is that we do what we do and get ourselves to be proud and maybe give this profession a new name based on the integrity and the ethics by which we approach it. That's the opportunity, but we have to be able to buy into who we are and embrace it, for sure.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said. What's interesting is you look at the stats of our industry and they tell you everything you need to know. 75% fail out in the first 2 years. Some say 71, some say 80. Let's just all agree it's somewhere in that range. Fail out in the first 2 years. Why? Because they weren't professionals. They weren't committed. Yeah. That's one thing, right? So the people that you're not interacting with, you're more than likely pushing them into the arms of those agents who are not going to be there for them. The other thing too is you give a crap about them. Take stock of that. You give a crap about them. Those other agents don't, which means you may not be the best agent in your market yet, but you are somebody who cares, and somebody who cares, I will put money on any day of the week versus somebody who's just there for the paycheck.
Yes.
Right. And it's interesting too. So I talk to agents a lot about theory of mind, orders of intentionality, where, I know what I'm thinking. That's the first order of intentionality. I think you think this. That's a second order. I think you think, I think this. That's a third order. Most of us as human beings can track up to about 5 or 6 orders of intentionality scaling up, right? And I ask the question, which one of these can we get wrong? And the answer is all of them, including number one, what I think I'm thinking, right? That's why psychologists and psychologists get so much money. But what's interesting is you couple that with this idea of the negativity bias, which we as humans tend to focus more on negative than on positives. And so we not only are making assumptions about what other people are thinking, but then those assumptions tend to be more negative in nature. And I wish I had some, great psychology degree or study neuroscience as much as you do to learn how to turn that off, reframe it. Any advice for us about how to turn off the negative voices inside our heads when it comes to assuming what other people are going to think about us ahead of time?
Well, I think what you're doing is right. We have to educate ourselves why we think that way in the first place. It's not because we're negative people. It's because it's a survival mechanism.
That's right.
And those who tend to think more negatively tend to survive. If you are walking in the woods and you hear a branch break and you get curious, go, what little critter could that be? The chances of you dying go higher. It's just higher. And so there's a survival rate that's higher to those that tend to assume the negative when there's a space of information. And that's what we were talking about. When I don't know the information, it is safer for me to assume the negative, to be prepared for that, versus to always assume the positive. Now, even optimists have negativity bias, by the way. So this isn't about being an optimist or a pessimist. This is much deeper than that. And so when, a lot of times we fear the unknown than the uncomfortable truth. Some people would rather be in the uncomfortable truth of being broke than engage in the unknown of what happens if I pick up the phone call. And the reason that's the case is because the unknown leaves this massive gap to fill with that assumption. And so then we got to ask ourselves, what are we filling these gaps of these unknowns with, and what sources do we have? And I was working with somebody yesterday, and he was talking about that right now, about 99.999%, and this is research-based, of the way we understand and interpret the world is it's driven by an unconscious and other than conscious process. And we have about 40 to 60,000, some places say 70,000 thoughts a day. And to start making sense of those thoughts, we daydream to put them together into narratives and stories to just make sense of all of these things. And so if we have all of these thoughts and we look at the visual piece, about 85% of our visual understanding of all the sensory input, 85% comes through our eyes. To create those thoughts that then become the narratives that construct the reality that drive the unconscious processes. Well, then what his case was is saying, well, maybe we need to surround ourselves with things that are driving those unconscious processes. What podcasts are you consuming? Who do you spend your time with? What is in your visual field? Like he pointed out in my office, he goes, there's nothing in here that tells you where you're going, Renee. This is all execution. You have camera equipment and whiteboards and everything, but where are you headed? Where's your vision? I'm like, wow, what a concept. And so I'm going to be reorganizing my office to have the visual stimulus that's constantly reminding me where I'm going. And as much as I love tech is out of sight, out of mind. There's nothing better than putting a sheet of paper on the wall that says you're broke. If that's true, then I better change that piece through the behaviors. If I'm broke, oh my God, I better not go to happy hour tonight because I'm broke right now. Jim Rohn, you say, affirm the truth. If you're broke saying that you're rich, you're delusional. And if you say, well, affirmations, I'm rich and I'm wonderful. That's not what an affirmation is. That's delusion. Affirmation is I engage in the activities that drive more results and opportunities. I make 100 phone calls a day. Those are action-based affirmations that drive the behaviors that lead to the results that we want. And the more you surround yourself around that, you're training your reticular activating system, which determines your attention and focus, to start seeing opportunity versus start seeing the lack thereof. Yeah. And so lots that you can do there.
Yeah. It reminds me of the Covey model of be, do, have, right? Not have, do, be. So, Renee, I've taken this conversation way fast, way high level. But you're going to be doing, actually, I don't know how we convinced you. I think maybe Leo's charming, or maybe I might have a little bit, but we got you to do a session coming up April 8th. It's going to be at 1 p.m. Central, Amplify Your Sales. I want to give everybody a sense of what they're going to get from that call.
Yeah. So my background is in behavioral neuroscience, but I also have a strong sales background and do a lot of sales training. And this is around how do we look at the neuroscience behind modern selling in this modern world? How do we take the fundamental pieces and modernize them so in an approach that we can actually engage in helping more people achieve that dream of home ownership and the wealth they deserve to have? And so we're going to be going through some basic fundamentals and then putting some cool innovations on top of that make it more fun and exciting. It's going to be intriguing. And I promise you, you'll get a different view of what selling is. One that comes from an ethical perspective that truly does help people in a way that doesn't mean you have to be pushy. Maybe care enough to be unreasonable, but not pushy. And so we're gonna learn a lot of those different elements. It's going to be very tactical as well as understanding and philosophical, driven by science, but you're going to be walking away with some very tangible items that you can do, that you can work on.
Yeah, so that's April 8th at 1 p.m. Central. Amplify Your Sales. And we'll get the registration link for you guys here. Also, too, if you can't wait till then, and you shouldn't, go check out Amplify EXP. So Renee was kind enough to do a program with us. He normally does his Amplify mentorship program, which is 2 calls per month. Because of his relationship with EXP, he expanded that to 2 additional calls specifically for EXP. So we've got 4 calls per month as part of that program. It's $97 a month, which is ridiculously cheap. Thank you for severely
Normally
discounting.
$297
Yeah. Thank you for doing
for half
that.
the stuff. Yeah.
I need to go back into sales. I am a heck of a negotiator, apparently, or you're just a really nice guy.
It's your charm, Brian. It's your charm.
Yeah, that's right. I'll tell my wife.
No,
I said that.
I believe in what EXP is doing. Your leadership team has become very dear to me. Leo's been a friend for over 15 years. Some of my favorite people in the industry are part of EXP. I love the model. I love the innovation. I love where you're going. And to me, I'd be stupid to not want to be a part of that in some way, shape, or form. And I believe that other people, once they know that story, will feel the same way. And anything I can do to help contribute to that feeling of FOMO for those that aren't a part of this wonderful train that's going in a great direction, I'm all for it.
Yeah. And if you're on the fence, if you're not sure, the first month's on us. Go sign up, expelevatecoaching.com. Don't like it, cancel.
Free first month. That's 4 coaching sessions free.
Yeah, and just amazing content. Also, amazing guests each month, bringing on people like Neil Ford and others who are just masters of their craft, and all around the topic of helping you build your sales and build your influence as a sales professional. Renee, as always, man, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to April 8th. And for those of you who want to check it out sooner, expelevatecoaching.com. Thank you, buddy.
Thank you, sir. See you all there.
All right, man. Happy Friday.